Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Burke with NEI. I'm the general superintendent with NEI. I've been with the company for just over 13 years now. We have certified close to 5 projects, with another 6 under construction and another 14 that have been pre-certified. So we're moving through and seeing it a little bit all over the place and applying our lessons learned and keep it moving. So, which is why we're here to talk to you about it today. John?
And I'm John McGinnis. I'm working with Delbrook, JKS. I've been there since November of 2016, functioning as a PM for the last 5 years or so. So, actively, I'm working on 2 passive house projects. One is, scheduled to be completed in January of next year. The second one is kind of just getting started with demo and, the pre-certification. The other 2, one of them is in Mattapan, the Loop, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And then the second one that just finished, in January of this year, JJ Carroll Apartments in, Brighton. I'm just like a lab. So that's my role. I don't know how many jobs our company has actively going on. As a PM, you kind of get, you get pigeonholed into a team for, depending on 12 months, 15 months, 24 months. But yeah, I'm here to kind of give you some of the lessons learned that I've had on those handful of projects. Going back to when we got trained in, what was it, summer of 2017 or 2018? So.
All right, so obviously this conversation can go on for hours and hours, so we've put some bullet points together and, a slideshow, and we'll do question and answers at the end for you. Just to touch on some of it. So, overall, our learning objectives, just debunking the common myths, just getting the process started. Obviously, passive house starts at the footing, right? So you gotta have a plan right out of the gate. The importance of collaboration and pre-planning as well as the QA/QC process. Very important to work as a team. Get out there. The subs are the masters of their trades, obviously, so you want to introduce them to what's drawn, what we're looking at for field conditions and work through it that way. Obviously, cost is big for everybody, number one question, right? And that's can go either direction, depending on what you're building and what you're trying to achieve. And then, at the end, closing out the project and testing and all that takes place to get you that cert. So the process, right? Like I said, starts at the beginning. We want to hit the ground running. We're building multifamily buildings. They're on a tight schedule. We want to get stuff moving as quickly as possible. So in order to do that, you start with pre-con, right? Start introducing the trades, start looking at things, feasibility, materials, and then just, kick it off right from boots on the ground and get going. So defining the project design and the requirements of the specifications. I mean, as a general contractor, obviously the pre-cert process is huge. If the project's been pre-certified, then the details are there, or if it's in the process of being pre-certified, we can work through what we need and we know what we need to hone in on. Let's see, and then, once you get that process down with the subcontractors and everything and looking at the details, then you start reviewing and getting the pricing, and then you can, apply your VE to that. And then identifying the challenges.
Yeah, I will say during like the final estimating phase, a lot of times you're trying to get the job pre-certified at that point. So you may have received some base comments, round 1, round 2, whatever it may be. A lot of times bulletins get issued and then the conversation is, well, let's include that bulletin in, the final estimate. And the more you can get included up front, obviously, as I think everyone knows, the better. A lot of times you're doing early awards on a handful of trades, so that the sooner you have things worked in, the sooner you can work those into sub scopes and try to get all of those I's dotted early.
Right. And then our last bullet on this slide is, again, collaboration with the team, all parties. I mean, it's super important to partner with the engineers, the architects, and the subs that are doing the work. Identify the challenges, what works, what doesn't work, what we've seen work, and then start vetting it out that way. So in that, with the myths, competencies of the subcontractors, not everybody's heard of passive house. I definitely talked to some subcontractors that have told me they've been doing it for 20-something years, which would have been great, but obviously not the case. So, and then, you know, just talking through some that had some concerns, right? One of them I'll give an example of is a drywaller on a certain job. Concerned about a cheap and passive house. Never done it before, never seen it, don't know if we're gonna be able to do it. It's like, okay, well, what about the details, right? See the details on drawings. Can you achieve those details? Can you put the caulking here? Can we tuck the drywall, you know, this way? Can we insulate, pre-insulate? Can we, you know, put up pre-rock and drill holes through it? And then, you know, finish it later? Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, if you hit the details, then people start to calm down a little bit and think about it in that sense. All right, well, I'm following what's on the drawings, it works. Material availability, like this is, you know, over the last couple of years, this was a big one for everybody, right? With COVID and everything, costs going up, trying to find what works, what doesn't, finding substitutions, and just learning the new stuff that's coming on the market, and how that can apply. So constantly chasing that and seeing what can be used here. You know, there's different requirements for different products, right? On a recent job that we're doing, we learned that the AVV couldn't go on the building until after the roof was on, so that changed our entire sequence. Use another product, everything's got to be primed before you can put the AVV on, but this product doesn't require that, so start working through things that way. And then
Also, insulation was a big one for a long time. You know, mineral wool, specifically like comfort board on the exterior was very difficult to get your hands on. There was plants shutting down, plants catching on fire, kind of all the above. You hear the stories from the subs, but it's real when you try to vet them.
right,
And fact check, and you know, the earlier you can identify those, and obviously the more that you do these jobs and you know the experience on those materials being long lead times, you can, you know, get ahead of that, and you can write it into the insulator scope that, you know, this is the schedule and these are the dates, and you need to order it, you know, 20 weeks, 30 weeks, 40 weeks, whatever prior to.
yeah,
So another benefit of the pre-con and the pre-planning.
absolutely. And then construction durations, and what does that do to the overall process? I mean, yeah, there are certain areas that you gotta focus in and maybe change the sequence, you know, is there anything outside of the passive house boundary? How are we testing the ductwork, things like that, you know, obviously you're not gonna put a pressure test on flex duct as easily as you will, you know, rigid duct. So do you do the trunk line and then come into the unit, get everything capped off, do what you need to do, then pick the cap and then put the flex duct to it and then go for your inspections that way. So you know, you have to look at things a little bit different, but all in all, if you're ahead of it, if you pre-plan, you can see where that is, you can map out through the building, and it doesn't really impact the schedule as much as you would think out of the gate.
And we'll hit on some more schedule stuff, a few slides later.
Absolutely. So, you know, with the subcontractors, touch on following details. Super important. They're there. We build off plans, building, you know, big buildings, we're building smaller buildings, unique buildings, whatever. The details are there for us to follow. So making sure that they understand the details. And if the project's been pre-certified, it makes it a lot easier, right? Use of technology and what's available to us today. Some of the challenges, obviously, with passive houses like air sealing and getting the, you know, the exchange rates that you're supposed to have. So you may want to introduce a spray instead of just doing your traditional UL assembly where you're caulking the top of the drywall. Maybe you're applying an acoustical sealant to that. Like I said, doing pre-rock is huge, putting up what you can in the areas you can through an RFI, making sure that you can apply using Roxol and Den's glass, rather than trying to drywall around wires and MEPs. You want them drilling through that with a nice tight hole and then going back and sealing that, or adding your insulation, and you know, just changing that stuff up. So technology has been great in terms of when we started doing passive house. The first project I was on was finished Cambridge to 2018 to what we're doing now. Tapes and wraps and things like that. A company like Sega, you know, they're new to this area in the last couple of years. They just built a facility up in Salem where you can actually go up there and test what you want to do with their products in-house. And you can get that vetted out long before you start on the project, right?
Yeah, we actually are using Sega down in Bourne, and I bumped into Laura Lind at the symposium in December. she used to work at Inchis, which was, she was great with them, but now she's working at Sega, same thing. You know, they give you the white glove treatment, they come to the site, they walk you through the mock-up for all the different products. It is, you know, I like it a lot. It's a cheaper, not cheaper, it's a little bit more expensive as far as the product, but you don't have to install the primer, which is a big one. It saves time, saves, you know, when you're talking about, you know, these buildings were always framing in the winter or we're framing in the summer and things are getting wet and moisture content and, very nice product. There's ways to, you know, adjust the fastening. If something starts to peel and you don't have to kind of start over, there's different methods. Yeah, great product.
Sorry, what product are you talking about?
Sega is a Swiss-based company. They do AVB, they do window wraps, they do foundation, Ventrum wraps, they do kind of anything
And-
exterior. I don't think they do a roof vapor barrier though.
They just came out with something similar. It's wet guard, it's called, but
Yeah.
it's semi-transparent. So if you need to get to a point, you can put it over your decking, you can actually see through it and where it is. So, manufacturer recommendations and utilizing the manufacturer's reps. So I mean, again, Sega, they'll come out to the job. You can set things up. I actually was talking with their regional sales guy today. They're getting ready to do a site tour back in Switzerland and inviting contractors there. Same time, we're setting up to do mock-ups with him. Henry Blue's gonna come out. We can get the Huber rep out there to take a look, and they're gonna check your installs and make sure you're doing it correctly. And, you know, potentially issue you the letter that you need to prove all that out. So the technology is definitely growing with Passive House, and it's making it, you know, a little bit more user-friendly.
I
So,
will say something in this detail. It's hard to see, but the more you do these jobs, there's little dabs of caulking that can randomly be shown in some areas. At the framing, joist base, for example, on exterior walls, it can be, if it's something that you haven't done before and you don't necessarily catch it, it can be a very labor intensive scope. So the more that we do these and the more that the pre-certification meetings happen and the more that you have meetings with, you know, the CPHC or the verifier, you know, who's worked through these details probably for countless hours, you can, you know, they can give you like a, hey, just so you know, we worked on this one for, you know, 5 meetings in a row. We did a bunch of iterations, we landed on this one for this reason. Then you can grab that detail, you can throw in a scope sheet and you can run with it with the subs. So very beneficial, but something very small that you may not catch.
yeah, and something like that may change it may change the sequence, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely.
so how we make it work, specialty trades, again, I'm general superintendent, been doing this a long time. Can I put in windows? Absolutely. Do I do windows every day? No. So if there's questions, something tricky, I'm gonna talk to the guy that does it every single day and pick his brain. HVAC, another thing, I understand how it works. Have I ever done my own system? No. I'm gonna go to the guy and figure out how we're gonna get to what we need, so we can test it, what it's gonna take for repairs, how far it can do stuff. I mean, just getting the buy-in from the subs. So what we found successful, and I think it may be in my next slide, but I'll say it here anyway, is separate meetings. You know, take it in chunks. These jobs we're doing in 18, 20 months, you don't need to cover the entire job in one meeting. You don't need to cover it in 5 meetings. Just take a look at the 1 month schedule and see what you got to do. Keep it a smaller meeting, hit those bullets. It's a feel good moment because you're working through the challenges and then you're keeping it moving, and it's just setting the tone for the rest of the job. So, that's where, yeah, proven success, you know, schedule recurring Passive House meetings. This has definitely helped us on many jobs, right?
One of the examples we did for the first time recently in Bourne. I'm gonna reference Bourne a lot just because it's very, very active and very current. We had the framer install the AVB in the windows. I know some people do, you know, maybe have a siding guy do the AVB in the windows, but depending on what your siding complexity is, you can easily, the framers can do AVB. And especially if it's a nail flange window, for example, you're gonna do a pre-wrap, you're gonna install the window, then you're gonna do the field. There's sequence there that if you are doing a strap anchor window, you know, maybe that sequence isn't gonna be like that. So maybe by the ABU with the siding contractor. If you're doing a traditional rigid insulation with PT strapping for your facade, or if you're doing, a more sophisticated green gird or a night wall or something. Those are just things that the earlier what you're looking at these wall assemblies with a fine tooth comb much earlier than maybe you would have, traditionally speaking, because you need to know who you want to buy what with. Which again, just comes with the experience and.
And to what you're saying, we had that on the job, that the passive house boundary was interrupted by some retail space, so we turned around and looked at having the AVB window and siding installer on site early so that he could work with the framer and make sure he's there to get his wraps where it needs to be, get them inspected, and then we could stand the next wall panel up there. There's a lot of opportunity to change things up and actually deliver a good product. So, this is more or less my last slide on the lessons learned, but this was a situation we ran into. At Finch Cambridge, so that job was under construction during the pre-cert process, or before they went pre-cert, and this is one of those boundaries, right? That's a steel column and steel beams on the exterior wall. To the right of the photo would be outside the passive house boundary. To the left was within. So working through that detail to make sure that all worked out took a team effort, and we were able to come up with some good details to get that to hit the mark and not look back.
Okay, so this is the lower right hand photo is actually from the loop in Metapan. Basically what this is showing is a few different things. So that first floor is a 14-inch post-tension slab with retail space below, not included in the passive house boundary. The residential units above that podium or that slab on deck or whatever you want to call it was in the passive house boundary. So all that curtain wall, all that storefront did not have to meet the U.18, which is a challenge depending on the manufacturer and the thicknesses and the pressure plates, materials, and there's lots of things that go into that. But this was a very tricky spot for us, and to be quite honest with you, we were struggling to pass the final blower door test at this project, and we did a lot of buffer testing. Clear result did a lot of buffer testing. VEC consulted on that buffer testing to prove that air was being lost to that space, not to the exterior of the building. So the performance was still there. There was just something that this was, I think, not going to say it was the first, but of this size, it was one of the first ones that was being done at the time. So, maybe something was missed, maybe there was an oversight. I'm not sure, but that picture was really just to explain where that came from. And then if you want to just go back really quick to this one up top is just another project where what this is basically showing is ERV takeoffs into a unit for a ceiling mounted ERV system on a standard corridor floor. We had to get a judgment letter from the design team to essentially break that fire lid barrier at the bottom of the 2x10 framing in the corridor, because the floor to floor height did not allow for all of the MEPs to fit. So that was just an example. A lot of jobs have adopted that we're working on right now to kind of as a workaround until the floor to floor height kind of catches up with the amount of HVAC and mechanicals and recirculation lines and all of this stuff that's going into these corridors. So that's kind of what just a little picture. Go with that. You can go to the next one. I think this is going to be the $1 million slide, right?
It probably is, if I can get there, Aaron. Thank you.
All right, so what does all this cost? So it cost is it really depends on what your basis of design is. So if you have, an older code requirement basis of design, then going to passive house is gonna cost more than if you have a more updated basis of design, that's a little bit more, energy efficient. So, the 2 to 4% is, we're really pretty comfortable in that range right now. There's jobs where you think it's gonna be, $5 million and it ends up being less than $1 million. Once the dust settles. So I think, I'm not gonna really go into too much more as far as the cost, because I might get myself in trouble. But, yeah, 2 to 4% is, we're pretty comfortable. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think you're kind of on the same page. There's some considerations as far as supervision and staffing, so it's definitely something that, depending on the project size, you may quote unquote assign an air boss to the job, who's someone's job to solely check in and confirm anything that goes through that exterior envelope gets sealed up the right way, because it's gonna happen out of sequence. The reality is something's gonna come up down the road and you may have to go into it, and if somebody just does a quick thing and doesn't let the superintendents know, it may not get sealed the right way, and that might be a reason why you're losing a bunch of your performance at the end.
To add to that, I mean, if you take a big multifamily project, and that's, controlled construction, there's other checklists that need to be signed off, inspection reports, so adding the passive house piece to it. Oftentimes, we're gonna add a QA/QC person to it so that they're honed in on just closing out reports and photos. I take it to a job right now that when I checked, say 6 weeks ago, there's probably 40,000 photos just from this one individual. Everything's documented. At the same time, if there's challenges, then you have additional site visits and you're dealing with, blower door and duct testing and just, trying to pre-test everything, because as we all know, the most important test is the last one. So with our foot on the gas pedal building these buildings, we want to make sure that we're not going backwards. So, from a company standpoint, we've got a bunch of equipment and we're adding people, and we're also, hiring third parties to come in and work with us through some details as needed. And that's obviously gonna have a cost to it.
There are some hard costs though, so like exterior storefront systems, for example, they're definitely more expensive than the traditional
Mhm.
exterior passive house stores, depending on the door. We're finding a lot of, you kind of have to go with a prescripted method, more or less, because the door performance data does not exist a lot of times with, call it, full light. Maybe the solid slab door performance data is there, but if you want to put a full glass light in it because it's that stairwell and you want to be able to see into it, that data, that testing just doesn't exist yet.
All right, and then make it fire rating and add another 0.
So what's the next focus?
Hey, Chris, while you got this slide up, I'm surprised compartmentalization out there, that's not news, right? Are you guys still seeing that as a question or an issue? It's like a real process, been compartmentalizing forever. And then you wrote Windows 3 times, you didn't. You speak, Windows.
Well, windows, if you're using triple pane glass windows, they are extremely heavy. And they're coming from not necessarily a local source. So you have shipping costs, replacement costs, and you're using different equipment to be able to get them in place, whether you're taking the windows apart, getting the glass out of them, carrying the frame up there, or you're renting a lift with a glass pack on it that can lift a minimum 250 pounds. The lift can go 400, or you can get, a different piece of equipment to lift it in place. I've had to use cranes to lift these windows, things like that cost money. The details to get them to pass and, all the extra tapes and whatever, that all adds up, depends on the job. And again, I mean, it's a tough slide because, you got to compare different projects, different timelines, right? We built some projects that the framing seems like it's every, 6 inches on center. And then I've gone to another job and it was 24 inches on center. You know what I mean? So didn't have plywood, didn't have this, didn't have that. It was a passive house job, but the demising walls were 2x6, 24 on center with RC channel on it. Not what we typically see. So, you're getting that compartmentalization, changing that sequence where you got to put plywood or drywall up first, then send the air sealer in behind, interrupting. I mean, there's all the cost of that because you're in production mode and you're trying to get stuff done. So those little things can change the building depending on the size of it.
I would say the other thing for compartmentalization, because we have been doing it for a long time, but what I'm starting to see a lot more is like gasketed electrical boxes are actually specifically being called out now. Which is a way that you can get the compartmentalization. It's not the only way, and it's not the most cost effective way sometimes. But there are jobs and there are some small things like that are being called out more often.
Mhm.
And, you know, it's adding cost to an electrician's scope on a, you know, if it's a 200+ unit job, or it's a, you know, it can add cost. I think this is, you know, there's a bunch of things that could, but to your point, compartmentalization's been around for a long time.
Right.
I think the sophistication as to what's being spec'd is maybe. Go ahead.
It's not true in the ones that you guys have been involved with, but I definitely see when you were looking at the client specifications and like special stuff.
Yeah.
At least on incremental cost, the geometry of the basic architecture and whether you have like podium and
Right.
like slab and grades, like easy.
Easy.
And if it's, the geometry is good, and the most expensive one I've seen for an ad was in Northampton, which is like a craftsman style, like every roof is different, right? So you can imagine the like,
Yep.
yeah, do you find that true?
Well, I'll stick with the foundation for the best example, right? So yeah, slab on grade, installation, we're compacting the stone, doing everything, you know, if you have trenches or haunches, I mean, they're all on a slope. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to do that with crushed stone, but it doesn't necessarily want to stay where you need it to. And then be able to walk on it and have it still stick, right? So we're introducing different things, whether we're taking another step and we're rolling that, or we're using a plate compactor, but you know, podium, open air underneath, all of the traps and everything were above on the next level. We bury it in 6 inches of insulation. So you're changing systems, you know, whether it's ProVent and you're going through and everything is on the one side. And you have to get all that done, insulate it all, then you're pouring like a hybrid Kipcrete mix that you can put metal studs to and shoot into it. That's not typical construction. It changes the schedule. It's a specialty trade. Hence, you know, you're gonna pay a little bit more for it. It's not everybody's doing that.
I would have to do, I'd have to dig into the different incremental costs associated with slab on grade versus podium versus, you know, post tension or something like that. I'd have to look into that and get back to you for sure.
In terms of compartmentalization, one thing that we've started doing, is we're also doing blower door before drywall, just to see what it's doing at the sheathing. Some of the details, obviously the exterior wall, where the interior wall wants to meet that's an air gap, you're sliding drywall. So we're going in, we're prepping that with tape and everything, just seeing if we can get close and then, you know, pen testing it to see where the leaks are and then applying that through. So, you know, drywall is a little easier to do. You can try to find a needle in a haystack when it's just a wood frame building without any of that in there. You could lose a lot of time, so.
And I will say the other thing, so with, on the job in Brighton, JJ Carroll, we had a substantial amount of slab on grade insulation under a podium with lots of punches, and there was 2 layers of rigid insulation. So that additional layer and the additional overlap, and every time you launch down, you know, cutting the 45, there was a lot more labor involved for the concrete contractor. And there was, you know, an attempt at a sizable change order to do so.
Yep.
Which we kind of vetted through and worked something out, but the job in Bourne, we use aero aggregate, which I'm sure some of you might be familiar with. Lavel's also a competitor, smaller market share to my understanding, but it essentially eliminates the need to do the rigid insulation under the slab because the aggregate is more or less a gravel insulation product. We put down, I think it was 6 or 8 inches, I can't remember exactly. Very sophisticated compaction method, two times this way, 2 times that way, and that's it. But it works great, and it sped things up. It was not labor intensive. You know, the trucks came from Pennsylvania. It was relatively easy to order, and something that we might start seeing more.
Yeah, we have it on an up and coming job. So,
Okay, we might have to speed things up a little bit, but So I think this is the PM's kind of roadmap, we can call it. So we talked about the pre-con, the design early on. We talked about buying it out and securing materials, construction testing. That's where kind of everything, you know, you put your money where your mouth is, more or less. So the design and pre-construction stuff, I think collaboration is the biggest thing that I can say here, and we kind of touched on it earlier, getting the CPHCs and the verifiers on board. We'll kick off with the contractor and the owner. You know, come up with hey, these are, I think one of the next slides, might be the next slide is, hey, this is the list of all the inspections that we're gonna have to do. You work that into your schedule, and then you set up a bi-weekly meeting, which is what we've done in the past, and you know, you don't cover the whole job the first week. You kind of say, okay, we're starting in the ground. Let's look at some foundation details. Let's figure out exactly who needs to do what. If we need to do a mock-up, we can do a mock-up. And you can get ahead of that. You do regular check-ins, you have meetings, sometimes you don't have them, maybe they're in person. I will say the more the construction is active, sometimes having that meeting in person, although a lot of things have been virtual over the last handful of years, can be very valuable.
To add to that on the last bullet, for those of you that work on that side of it and work with us on the contracting side, the site visits they're so important. You know, you gotta look at the details. Lines don't always match up in the field, you know, so. You have that going on or have that ability to schedule those, you won't regret it.
There you go, schedule. So I think this is, I'm not exactly sure whose list of inspections this is. Maybe it's just a
think it's ours.
collaboration of a handful of different verifiers that we've worked with, but kind of gives you you know, these are all the inspections, starting from foundation all the way to your final testing. IR scans of the exterior, the timing kind of gets worked in there. There's requirements and all the specifics that, you know, we can go through, but I'm sure a lot of you are more familiar with than maybe I am as far as the 0.30 CFM at 50 pascals per square foot, you know, but the next slide, I think, is where the early pre-con and the schedules that we create for ownership and ultimately get worked into the subcontractors contracts. You input those as milestones, so it might be, yeah, it's relatively okay to see here, but there's construction milestones at the top, and there's a section right under incorporate, right next to it, there's a FIA section, there you go. So you put the milestones in there as far as what you're gonna be tracking, when you're gonna be tracking them. And then if you go to the next slide, you put it in there, you know, by floor, by level. When you're gonna do your duct testing, you know, that depends on whether you're doing it at the roughing phase or whether you're doing it at the final phase. Personally, I found doing it at the roughing phase is much more beneficial. Slightly different leakage requirement, but you can see and find the leaks much easier than when there's sheetrock up. What we got next? Yeah, okay, so I think color, to stick with the windows. Plans were never in color and budgets were never included to print plans in color, but now that we have so many different materials and so many different thermal barriers and air barriers and where they need to lap and what laps over what, having plans in color, printing them out in color is like invaluable.
Yeah.
You know, my copy you printed out for me has been black and white, so it's a little bit. But from a compartmentalization standpoint, I mean, having that set for compartmentalization and knowing exactly where those barriers are and what's green and what's blue and what's red and what's pink is awesome.
Yeah, it tells the story. And then the legend will help with the different colors for what's what. And that, just having that compartmentalization set within the set is.
You wanna just
Yeah.
flip back to the other slide, so. Like, for example, this detail right here. It's hard to see, and there's gonna be other ones that are blown up. It's essentially where you're wrapping that vapor barrier from under slab to the exterior vapor barrier. Then there's gonna be another piece of tape that goes over that to kind of make that final air seal. If that's not printed in color, you don't necessarily catch the fact that there's gonna be an additional 6-inch or 9-inch piece of, you know, for CEGA term, spectrum that goes at the bottom that kind of ties everything in. You know, you can protect it. A sequence thing that we've done in the past is you protect it with the exterior foundation insulation. You kind of score the back of it before you put it on, so that when you get to that final detail and you're laying your wall panel and you're tying in your ABB, you can just break off the insulation, do that tape method, then you have your piece already basically pre-cut, and you just put it right back on. That's something that we've done most recently that we found really effective.
Just to go back to what we were talking about with the slab on grade. So if you see the horizontal insulation under the slab and that turns up, right? One of the inspections is that insulation has to be tight, and if not, you got to spray foam it. So you see where it comes underneath the slab and it gets to the haunch, 45 down and goes back up. Somebody's cutting that for a building that's 50,000 square feet, whatever. That's not easy to do. And that's a crew out there. You're not getting it from the factory that way. So that's one of the things that we have to address early on to make sure we have that down. And then it gets inspected, obviously, and where it gets covered with concrete. And one of the reasons they do the concrete like that at the top is so that the floor has something to adhere to and not 2 inches of rigid. So we found success with this by getting, 16-inch circular saws and just setting up tables and, 4-man crew out there just ripping the insulation for days.
All that goes away with the Dwell or the other brand is.
It wouldn't.
The vertical would still be there. The vertical insulation between the slab edge and your foundation wall would still be there,
Right.
but the under slab stuff, yes, in our situation, it was removed.
And cost is similar,
I'm gonna
right?
say something crazy. It was a slight credit to go to the lab almost. When the dust settled, small slab on grade building, call it 15,000 square feet. L-shaped, very straightforward. It ended up being a small savings.
And you have more control over timing because you have less subs. And if you have your site contractor in-house, right, you got a lot of control then too.
Yeah, I mean, the site contractor did the entire thing and, basically the 6 inches, once it's compacted, I mean, you're ready for paper barrier and concrete.
And awesome on another problem.
Okay, so on the right is an image of a fire stopping chart, which is something that, we have started printing out, laminating and stapling everywhere that you can possibly find it around the building. Because we're going third party fire stopping on a lot of these projects now, some of the towns and I think some of the inspectors are actually requiring it. So we've been doing it for a long time just because from a QAQC perspective, it's much easier to control anyways. But the chart basically is something that we've used to, the sub's not going to be, the MEP contractors are not going to be fire stopping their penetrations, but if they don't cut the penetrations to the appropriate size to allow for the proper annular space for the fire stopping, then we can't seal it the right way. So we've been posting charts around and it's actually been really effective. So that's like another procurement thing or a buyout thing where that goes in the scope, the chart doesn't go in the scope, but literature that says you're gonna follow that goes into the scope. She's on this slide, anything good? We can keep going. There's a lot of other slides. I think this is just another slide related to as soon as the buyout happens, getting the subcontractors' involvement early on, prior to the actual start of their work. I think what we've also struggled with on previous projects, and that we're writing into scopes now earlier on is to the best of your ability, assign the foreman who's gonna be on the job and have them come to the initial kickoff meetings. So a lot of times what happens is somebody from the company you know, maybe a general super or a senior PM or someone who's maybe not necessarily gonna be that day-to-day person comes, learns about it, oh, this is great, yep, we can do this, no problem. And then the foreman shows up and he has no idea what the job is and, you know, it's just another learning curve and, you know, potentially something gets missed early on and then you have to go backwards. And so that's something I think from a training perspective, we're trying to buy that out. It's hard. Everyone understands job slippage is a real thing. So, you know, you may have someone assigned that, you know, doesn't necessarily work out, but it's an attempt that can be beneficial.
Yeah, big area for that is, when you're doing the mock-ups for like windows and things like that. I don't know who you buy that out with. We're gonna do the mock-ups early, so we get everything approved, make sure everybody's weighed in on it. When it comes time to actually do the window, the guy that did the mock-up may still be on another job because the time from when you did it, so. That conversation early on is huge. You want the repeat of the same, especially when you're dealing with the envelope.
I think the rest of these slides are more so just like pictures and examples, so we can kind of try to go through them.
Yep.
Relatively quickly and then take some questions, and, you know, similar like what we've already talked about, under slab insulation, haunches, any
Yeah.
gaps, spray foaming.
That's exactly what I was getting at. That looks great, and then you walk on it and it moves, and then you start.
Can be very tedious. These are the foundation details that we were talking about. You know, depending on, that looks like it's a zip bar system, so. I haven't personally worked with that yet, but I don't know if you guys have.
Yeah.
But those, you know, tie-ins of where ABB gets, you know, from the vapor barrier under the slab gets tied into the exterior. Always maintaining that, you know, anything that changes. I don't know if, originally it felt like we were hesitant to be like, hey, we don't have 2 inches of insulation here, we only have 1.5. I feel like letting whoever the Wolfie modeler is know anytime something changes. Just plug it in and see if there's an impact. You know, for example, something that we did. You know, right, wrong, or indifferent, to carry an R39 on the roof versus the plans fell for R50. There was a consultant at the time that said, no, R39 should be fine. Push came to shove and we were submitting on the roof, it needed to be R50. It was a little bit late in the game to add that additional layer, so the workaround was we just added open cell foam under the sheathing to get to the R50. So something that we just basically said, hey, this is where we are and this is why we carried something, you know, you said it was okay however long ago, but now things have changed and we get that. So I think just being open line of communication with your CTHC. Insulation, spray foam, dense pack.
There's a couple things to point out in here, right, as you're looking at these photos. So moisture content of materials as you cover it is a big thing that we have to sign off on, right? That's part of the QA/QC process, they call it. So, you know, depending on the spec, wood could be anywhere from 15 to 19%. Seeing that on the job, but then exterior sheathing had to be down to 12%. Insulation, that has to, when you're doing damp spray or anything like that, that has to have something, same with gypcrete. So.
And the CPHC needs to see all of this before you cover it.
Exactly. So,
Or
yeah,
that verifier, sorry.
and sometimes the owner wants to save every unit, so we're creating our charts and doing everything we need to, and it's not a problem, but if you look at the first photo on the left. And then, you know, the upper photo, you'll see icing in there. You know, that's obviously rim joist, but it's also an area where we would want to pre-rock too, so that would get up there early before we're ready to do the rest of it, and just change that sequence a little bit, you know. I think this is more than the same.
Yeah, kind of more the same. If you want to go back, the blown in is, we've done that on the last few, works out pretty well. Cleaner than you would think it would be with the netting.
Keep going. That's a good example of pre-rock.
Yeah,
Right.
there you go.
So. Kind of looks like a little bit of caulking in there, but that could also be spray around the truck. So we're putting that up early. You know, as part of our pre-rock plan, we'll create a whole drawing for everything, but horizontal, you know, MEPs, we want them penetrating that layer instead of trying to get the drywall to go and then piece around it. So you'll see that everywhere. And again, rim joist is done, that's icing, it's not affected by any water. So with this having dense glass on it, say we were approved in this photo of where the roof is on, that we could start this process to maintain.
Some of the testing and verification, so I think this is just some pictures of, you know, this is our team at JJ doing some of our own environmentalization testing. You know, you can get trained, you know, new ecology helped us figure out how to run the blower door, which was very kind of them. Once you learn how to do it, it's rinse and repeat. You can do every unit. You know, the verifier is gonna confirm, has to test the sample size of units, and if you fail a unit, then you have to test a new sample size. So the goal is obviously not to fail any units, because then you're delaying the project potentially. And then you're opening up, you know, who knows, the more units you test.
Right.
You know, you want to pass on the first go around. So us taking a little bit of additional time, having the supers run around and do some testing, extremely beneficial. There is a 6 sides of the box. You can do some midpoint testing with, you know, no sides of the box or 3 sides of the box. There's different trains of thought around that. I think any midpoint test is valuable as long as you do it and you have, you know, some sort of a smoke pen or something to, you're pressurizing, find areas on the outside of where it's going. Vice versa, if you're depressurizing. So there's some,
It's just an actual example from Holbrook Senior Housing that just achieved.
that's a midpoint, right?
Yeah.
So midpoint, something to point out, pictures of, there's gonna be lots of things potentially that you have to temporarily enclose because you're doing a midpoint test and, you know, maybe you don't have the overhead door for whatever reason, or you don't have your U.18 curtain wall because the thermal doors are a 16-week lead time, 18-week lead time. And so there's gonna be things that you have to temp. And I think the more that we do these projects, we can build in some cost for that. I think originally there was and it doesn't add up to a lot of money. And it's something that, you know, the contractor would try to do in good faith to kind of like move things along, but there can be some substantial costs. You know, if you're trying to test a podium and the first floor is excluded and the elevator shaft goes down to the first floor, you got to find a way to close off the bottom of the elevator shaft. Otherwise, the air is just gonna. So it can be challenging, and to be honest, it's there's costs associated with that. So midpoint, something to point out, it's not a pass or fail. It's just a periodic test that you want to try to find problem areas or check to make sure you're going in the right direction. I think you've experienced it. We just experienced it in Bourne. You know, we were able to pass our midpoint test. Again, slab on grade, 42 units. As easy as they come if you want to go down that route.
This need verifier buy-in. Is this a reaction to some verifiers not being bought in?
No, I think originally, I've seen the contracts grow substantially, and we don't usually see that stuff because it's usually an owner cost. But I've seen, you know, hey, we have one final building blower door test carry, and it's like, that's maybe a little bit too optimistic. And then I've also, you know, depending on the day, and a lot of this can be the supers or, you know, timing, or, hey, we're doing a test on Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. You guys don't want to hang around until 6, running the test so that you can run around with your smoke pen. So it can be a little bit of a timing thing, but I think the more visits you have, the better. And
chili. It's black and beans. Ignore the mole part, just chili. You want me? You can find out. I haven't tried it yet.
One of these I took them down.
Something about mole and beans.
Yeah, I think the buying in is, you know, at the end of the day, they're there to verify numbers.
Right.
And they're there to, you know, tell you whether you're passing or not. I think if we can encourage the, hey, you know, you have the equipment, you have the testing equipment to tell me that I'm failing. Okay, I'm failing. Can we maybe let it run for a little bit so we can try to figure out why it's failing and not just like, hey, you're failing. Hey, I gotta go to the next one because, you know, I mean, time's valuable and everyone has resources.
I know a lot of verifiers where they get sucked into being consultant. And it's a big gray area,
Mm,
and I know theories looking around, for example, rewriting their contract. To include consulting because it makes the verify easier.
okay,
The verifier should be the consultant, the way there's to be an overlap there,
yeah,
and it's a lot of work, it should be complicated.
yeah. No, it makes sense.
In the end, it's lessons learned too. I mean, the verifiers are seeing different things in different jobs and we may only be seeing it, you know, for a moment in time on this job, right?
Yeah, they could have solved that problem 2 months ago.
They may, yeah,
They
so
want
it's
to share
sharing
knowledge,
information.
but there's a liability if you're not the one hired to consult, so.
Exactly. Yep. So just working as a team, that's all.
I've got a couple of verifiers who are no longer recommending a midpoint whole building, and instead they wanna do midpoint like partial buildings. They wanna take a wing, they wanna take a couple floors and a corner, you know, but they don't need the whole building. Do you guys have an opinion on that, preference on that?
I mean, yes,
You want the whole building?
no, it depends on the project, like it, Concord or Finch Cambridge, we had to build that in 3 towers. I mean, we're bringing the building up and it's all open on one end, there was no testing until we closed the whole building in, so. You know, but in the end, we were taking unit by unit and doing blower door everywhere to make sure we got to what we needed, so I think it depends on what you're doing. And what you can actually do without going backwards too far. Like, we weren't gonna take that, you know, take the first tower, if you will, and temporarily sheet the whole thing to do a test for one day. We had a different workaround for that.
I would say a midpoint, like. You definitely wanna do midpoint testing, and if you don't wanna call it whole building, you can call it, you know, whole partial.
Yeah.
Section, phase, like you can call it whatever you wanna call it. I think the midpoint test. Is to, as soon as you can in theory try to test the whole building or a whole phase or a whole tower. With as few temporary measures in place, the better. The problem is that. You know, define too many temporary measures. You know, once doors go in, for example, there's only so many. Areas on that door that can quote unquote be taped. You know, depending on Theus's approvals. You know, if it's an ADA threshold, you know, you can get away with it, you know, sometimes, but, midpoint testing definitely has to happen. I think it's totally job specific. And it depends on how the job's being built.
Right.
Does
So,
that get designed, that midpoint testing with the verifiers up front? You try to project what kind of testing you can do for this specific building? And do you get the verifiers involved early enough in those kinds of discussions?
short answer, yes. I mean, we'll do, you know, the weekly passive house meeting or the bi-weekly passive house meeting. We'll look at different, you know, milestones that we want to hit. We'll bring the teams out to review what we have in place, and then we'll talk through how we're gonna test things. So yeah, it starts early. It's just what's feasible for that particular project.
Yeah, and I would say like the actual contract piece with ownership, as far as, you know. There's obviously a dollar value associated with a midpoint test that's carried, and that, you know. Can vary depending on whether they're sending 2 people out there or whether they're sending a small army out there to tape. You know, if you go to the next slide, if, you know, depending on the midpoint testing, there's lots of areas, vents, louvers, exterior. There's things that can be taped, that need to be covered to do that test, and that's a resource, that's time. So I think we do, once the job is going, we talk with verifiers about like what that looks like, when does it make sense? Hey, should we do it this week or should we just wait 3 weeks because we'll have the rest of the buildings in on, you know, the southeast elevation. But early on in the contract phase, I think, that would be more of like a not a lesson learned for the contractors as much as maybe ownership. The more they get into it and the more they try to set those contracts up.
Right,
My
because
opinion.
defining the scope between the owner and the verifier, to make sure it covers all the scope you need in testing, has to be done early.
Yeah, or unit costs or something, right?
Yeah, per visit costs.
Mm.
And I think it comes with the more that everyone does this, you said clear result is adjusting their contracts. I'm seeing, more visits be carried. I'm seeing more midpoints be carried. So I think the more that people do this, the better that that's gonna be. I think this is just an example of a midpoint unit compartmentalization, so water's not gonna be on, you can't fill the trap. You can stuff it with something in theory that's gonna kind of do the same thing. I think that's just a problem area potentially, on an exterior grill on a ERV or some sort of ductwork that, potentially might miss some air. The thresholds for the compartmentalization are far less stringent than the whole building test. If you want to say it's 5 times less stringent or whatever however the math works out. I think initially everyone was optimistic when they were passing unit compartmentalization testing and they're like, oh no, we're great. Every unit's passed. Like we're gonna be fine and rainbow and we're gonna be there. The whole building test is way more strict. So, something to just keep note of.
Yeah, you have to work with your trades too, like, cause they're gonna be in and out of the building. They open the door, you had it sealed up, gotta go into a unit, we're a couple hundred people on a job site trying to do the whole building. It's not necessarily easy.
One of the communication gaps we had recently was, we were doing a midpoint test, which the midpoint test on the whole building was a setup of a couple hours, and then the test ran for, call it 20 minutes. The HVAC guy said, oh no, they're closing the building down for the day. So like half the trades left in a half an hour period that we were setting up to do this half an hour test. Just another like communication thing that the more you communicate with everyone, the better, so you don't lose any production. This is duct tightness and ventilation testing. So, at the rough in versus at the final, slightly different requirements. As far as your leakage, there's 2 tests that we perform: central ventilation duct testing, in-unit duct testing. We find that the verifiers can do multiple, they typically have the heating and cooling setups with them, and maybe the centralized setups are slightly different, but they can do both in a day as long as whatever systems are ready. Scheduling that in advance, putting that in your schedule, all things that we've learned along the way. And we can probably try to wrap this up.
That's a lot.
Flow. The low flow barometer. One thing that we've definitely run into is the equipment that the testing and balancing company is using needs to be equivalent to or equal to whatever the verifiers equipment is gonna be. A lot of arguments between balancers who say they've been doing FIAs for 20 years.
Yes.
And oh, no, I've never missed a number. Calibration of equipment can also be an issue sometimes if it's not, hasn't been calibrated in the appropriate time frame. Things that we've learned along the way.
Any questions?
And folks online, you can type in some questions in the chat room.
What kind of training do your subs come to you with in Passive House, or what kind of training do you provide to them about Passive House? How many times do you have a sub who comes in? He's a sheetrock guy, but he's never done Passive House. He doesn't even know what it really is.
That happens often, but we utilize a lot of mock-ups. So we'll do, whether it's an exterior mock-up or we're doing, the windows, the veneer, the siding, whatever, and then we'll turn around, we'll move that to the building. Once the building's up, we'll also do unit rough and mock-up layout, drywall finishes, and we'll test those units with them as well, so. And then periodically throughout, in our meetings, we'll set up times, you know, if we're meeting weekly to go over certain components, so it's like, all right, before we get into, in drywall, let's pick a couple of units you guys go in and, you know, do what you think you own, and then we'll come in and we'll show you what's different, and we'll bring, you know, the verifier in and we can work through some details. Sometimes that's a double-edged sword, because it's like, oh, we need to do this, we gotta change this. And yes, it's a better idea, but we're already, you know, we're already cooked, we're moving forward, and these are the details to follow, and so, you know, those conversations happen, but sometimes it leads to, hey, this little change is gonna be a little bit better, and everybody's on board and go through it, so.
I've marked any CPBs if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, how many of the subs actually have CPHD?
I haven't bumped into one yet. I think it's fair. I mean, Delbrook has a lot of CPHBs now, and I think we're allocating resources to get our folks trained on that
That
because,
sucks.
I mean, everyone knows the market right now and the volatility and in staffing in general, subcontractor staffing pool is extremely volatile, so
Right,
I don't think it makes sense for them to allocate resources to CPHB train their foreman if they potentially are gonna take a job at a competitor, you know, 6 months later. But for us, if we know it and we've gone through the training and we see that it's really, you know, it's not. You don't need to overcomplicate it, because to your point earlier, if the drawings are pre-certified and you have details that if they're executed on work. All the details, make sure you don't, you know, make sure the drywaller doesn't do, well, I've been doing this for 20 years, like. I know that, this is how we're doing it on this end, so just follow this one.
Is there any value, or do you ever attempt to have a sub who's got no experience with it? Here you're talking, you dive into the details. This is the details. This is what you're gonna do on this job. Is there any value in them seeing a passive house 101? Like we have 101, 201, which gives you the overview, what the hell is passive house anyways? Because gets the sub a sense of what is it we're trying to do versus just what's that detail on this job.
no, absolutely, I mean, understanding what you're doing, why you're doing it. Tap it out, when you walk up to it, you're like, well, wait a minute, I just have to do that. Here, it's a little different conditions, so let me at least ask the question. Right, and that happens a lot, and everybody's prideful in what they do, and, you know, take it very serious, and they wanna turn over a good product.
So do you take advantage of our pre-recorded passive house 101s to show subs?
Have I taken a bit? No, I have not. But I bring that, I work with them.
It's a valuable point, I mean, it's something that would be relatively easy for us to do, and. I mean, enforcing whether the subs do it or not is something that would be challenging, we're not gonna sit them down in a room.
Make them sit down.
Good point,
Yeah.
something that we could easily, log across.
I think it's even like the Stephen Winters recorded ones by trade, I think are short.
Right.
And it's a little bit more to their trade, right?
Right.
As opposed to the 101, which is a little theoretical.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's a good point,
PS is coming out with a training program for the trades.
Yeah, that's CPHT.
That's what it's called. But yeah, they've already built all the modules out. They haven't on.
They haven't, they don't have sites. So if you guys have sites anywhere for them to train, that.
So we've someone's out.
I would be curious what happens with some of the sophisticated subs that watch these videos and then they get the gears turning and then they start asking questions. I would be interested to see what. I'm sure for every good point, there's gonna be probably a dozen not so good points, but
Yeah.
there might be some valuable stuff in that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But with your feedback, I think.
Yeah, no, that's good. Sure we get those links around
Chris,
Yes.
I want you each to answer this.
at the same time.
No, it's too late for that. So working with the HVAC, sub, what can the mechanical engineer do better to make that go well? Yeah, number one, two.
I
Require,
always think engineers of record could do more site visits. Personally, so that's an easy one, potentially. HVAC is it's a tough one. Because you're trying to balance the super low pressure system to produce 12 CFM. At a unit that could potentially be however many linear feet away from the source. Why duct testing is so important, and I think why AeroSeal is something that's being utilized a lot more often. More site visits potentially.
I would say access, right? Because some of the challenges that we've seen going back to the corridor. Figuring out how to, if there's a way to be able to make it more easier to work around the ductwork, make sure this sealed properly. And give that space, maybe it's a side takeoff instead of off the top, or, you know, just give it. You gotta physically get in there and make it work, and physically get in there and seal it, and, you know, the ductwork is fine, right? But if they can't, they haven't figured out that sequence to get it up there, or trying to do it in place. And then we're running around chasing, trying to find leaks and figuring that out. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest challenge that I see.
Yeah, I was gonna add that the builder, that integrating the ductwork with the structure is completely overlooked. More often than not, and if the equipment specified, getting all the problems are from getting 8 feet. Like, is there room to get in there with the insulation on there? Is there room to get that mastic on that last joint, get the connecting of those parts? And then you change the ductwork, and now your wide for CFM, like your DRV just got wrong. Because they had 12 elbows per round.
Which is to the point earlier where the floor to floor heights, generally speaking, have been. I don't think quite caught up with the additional amount of heating and cooling, central ventilation systems that are going into the corridors. You know, shafts make it obviously easier, but then they decrease the amount of livable space that you can have in your building, so. A lot of times shafts aren't utilized, and then you're throwing the ERV up in the ceiling. You know, wood frame is a lot of what we do.
Right.
Wood frame trusses are 24 inches on center. You really only have 21 or so inches from the bottom cord to the inside to inside, so. Any of these, you know, a lot of stuff doesn't physically fit in between that space, and then you're trying to run, you know, 8-inch takeoffs. And you're trying to find the exact web that you can potentially go through. That original image where we were doing the top takeoffs was because we didn't want to drop a ceiling in the unit. We had 2x10s in the corridor, and we had 18-inch trusses in the units. If we went below, then we're under the ceiling because the duct is so big and the takeoff has to scoop down. Whereas if we went up, yes, we were breaking the fire lid, but we were able to get a judgment onto how we could maintain the UL there. And then we're in the truss space. So that was with the ceiling mounted system. Things that, floor to floor heights, more site visits. You know, coordination is something that we've gotten a lot better at. We still have a lot. I think we could still do better. We can always do better with coordination. And maybe the reviewing of the actual coordination files, potentially could be useful. You know, we model everything in 3D. We send in the coordination files in 2D, and you know, you might get an approval on it, but it's, you know, it's up to the general contractor to make sure that everything still fits and everything's still, you know, per the design intent. So maybe some additional coordination meetings potentially.
And those typically done in Revit.
Yeah. That's how we do our in 3D.
What do you think prevents us from getting electronic models?
I don't think anything, I just don't, I haven't been asked to provide it as part of the coordination submittal personally.
We definitely submit on some, I won't say all of them, but. Definitely been submitting recently. We're hiring a lot of third party to help us with that coordination.
Submitting electronic files, just send them through that way.
Don't even use Procore, just blast around the file.
Yeah, let's figure out how we.
I think it's that's a good, yeah,
Definitely.
good takeaway. Yes, right.
issues first, but.
Yes.
You know, I'd like to say something before we finish.
Oh, sure. Have you seen any cost savings from panelized or prefab product? Have you priced done any comparison?
In terms of what?
Like in terms of like a wall section that will have some degree of prefabrication?
I mean, I think there's just, in general, there's cost savings by going panel, but it's a gift and a curse, right? Because the biggest challenge with wood panel construction is when you find an issue. If you find it on the third floor, you need to check everything below you because it's, or, you know, if they missed something, it could have affected everything. So, you know, in theory, wood panels are coming out and they're coordinated and everything's there, but you're still going back and making openings and all that. With the right sub, I stick frame buildings quicker than panels before. So it kind of depends, but, I don't know.
We've been seeing a lot of prefabbing being done on central ERV ducts with the insulation coming pre-installed. There's definitely been some cost savings there and some QAQC that's beneficial. Because the duct runs are being put together in a shop, it's a controlled environment. They're getting shaped, you know, the insulation's being shaped nicely, and then all you're kind of really dealing with in the field is the joints. You know, depending on if it's a flange duct, you're addressing the joints specifically, and everything else, you know, in theory should be, you know, well put together. So we've seen some benefits there. Pre-insulated PEX, something that we used on a job recently. Cold water only, I want to say. Could be wrong, I could have that backwards, but I think cold water requires ½ inch and hot water requires, I think, about a inch. So we couldn't find a pre-insulated product with that thick of a jacket, but you know, saving time for these plumbers to not have to insulate thousands of feet of PEX piping saves money, saves time.
So before we break, folks, I just want to say thank you to you both for all of these lessons learned. I had the great fortune to work with both of your companies, and I'm very appreciative of all of the level of coordination you showed here, and all the lessons learned. So thank you, and John, especially to you. So
Is there any way to get a copy of the slides?
Okay.
We also have we'll have a recording of this presentation posted by the end of the week too. All right, thank you so much.